It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a part of your workday. Also, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We got a great show for you here today. Lots to discuss. It's Friday. We're going to bring in the RealAg Issues Panel to discuss all the big happenings of the week. In the summertime, you sometimes get periods where it's like, what happened this week? We are in the dog days of summer, baby, and this was not one of them. There's a lot happening. Now, part of the reason is there's a lot happening on the Hill in Ottawa as we get a little bit closer to that summer break. MPs looking to go home. Stuff's trying to get through the Senate. We want to get royal assent on some of this stuff. And so there's always this pressure cooker, this deadline. Nothing makes things happen in Ottawa quicker, or I guess to a T, than some sort of deadline in front of a politician who wants to get back to his or her riding. For the summer break, that is for sure. So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of issues today. I got Kelvin Heppner and Lyndsey Smith with me here today, and we're going to break down all the big issues of the week. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as TikTok. Or you can call the RealAg listener line. The feedback line is this, 855-776-6147. You dial that number, press the number 3, and you leave me a message. Love your feedback. This is a two-way conversation. I don't care if you share my opinion, disagree, you got questions, you got comments, you got some rants to get off your chest. Let me hear about it. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we've got the RealAg Issues Panel right after this. It's now time for a product spotlight with U.S. Borax. We're talking to Roger Gunning. So when we're talking about refined borate fertilizers, why does it matter where the borates come from?
It actually comes from Boron, California, which is a small town. It's one of the richest borate deposits on the planet. It's about the purity of the product, but for a few reasons, I think our North America farmers, we're closer. The convenience of our distributors and warehouse locations with no import restrictions. And this helps allow us to provide a better service than other borate fertilizer suppliers. Our customers, they can be confident that we're providing them with a refined borate product free from impurities that may pose a problem, for their crops.
Well, as we've been saying here on RealAg Radio for the past couple months, Granubor from US Borax. Ask for it by name and go to borax.com.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio for the RealAg Issues Panel here on this Friday. We have a lot of issues to talk about. That is for sure. Let's bring in our panel. First up, it is Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are you doing?
I'm doing so great. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fabulous. It's Friday.
Yeah. It's
right?
It's been a busy week though.
Have you seen some of the tornado stuff that has
wild?
Yeah.
Yeah,
wild.
wild.
We had a wild weather week in southern Alberta.
Yeah. The one tornado went right past our coworker's sister's yard.
Quite the video.
Watching a video on social media, it's like, hey, that's my house.
Well,
anyway,
also dealing with some. Well, weather can be kind and weather can be quite unfortunate, but Kelvin Heppner of Altona, Manitoba. Kelvin, Manitoba also saw some pretty devastating hailstorm. It was earlier this week, was it not?
Yeah, earlier this week or last week, there were in western Manitoba, north of Brandon, saw some pretty significant hail damage to crops. So still some time to reseed, but I think overall the broader concern, like it is in much of Western Canada and parts of the U.S., much of the U.S. as well, is dryness, and the crop is kind of stalled out in some ways now. Thankfully, this week we didn't have as much heat as the couple of weeks prior, but yeah, things could definitely use some good rainfall here in the next couple of weeks to keep moving.
Yeah, I don't know where the farmer was from. He was on the prairies, but it was a picture of his wheat heading out next to a gumboot.
Yeah.
Good.
I've heard of wheat heading out here in Manitoba, Alberta as well, like spring wheat just heading out when it's exactly 6 inches tall or whatever. And I heard a crop insurance claim being filed already on wheat, and the crop insurance adjuster's like, we've never had a claim prior to the seeding deadline. So let's try again, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
And this is kind of why. And this now there's some things I can explain. There's some things I can't. Let's just put a sort of a prairie wrap on this for a second, in the sense that our latest May results for the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index really show a lack of confidence in trying to market your crop. We've actually, we're down to, out of 200, we're down to like 79. So we've been declining since last fall. For the prairies, in the Farmer Rapid Fire, you can hear it. I'm not repeating the same mistake of 2021. I don't care. I'm not going to be tricked. I thought I made the right decision in 21. I thought I was being proactive. I'm not doing it again because I just don't know. That hangover, Lyndsey, is really real.
And it is. And I think that, probably for people outside of that region, so here in Ontario or those, it's hard to actually grasp just how dry some areas are and how bad 2021 was, and how financially how just incredibly hurt a lot of people got in 2021. And so we are now, some areas definitely improved last year. We've got other areas improved for this year, but we still have a widespread dry bias. We've still got exactly that. We've got incredibly short, incredibly stunted, low yield potential crops out there. And we've also got all this volatility in the markets. We've got declining markets. How do you be confident in that scenario? Where does the confidence come from? I mean, I think farmers are in a position where they're just trying to cover risk, and there's not a lot of upside on that one. And I think when you say, and we talked about this a lot in 2021 of farmers, rightfully so, sort of feeling like I did the right thing and I got burned and, and those sorts of things. But this is part of using the tools that are in front of you, and realistically, in a severe drought, maybe the best thing you can do is actually just to wait, and perhaps, that's your tool, because it is hard. I think here in Ontario, we just went through 3 weeks of no rain, and I heard all these farmers really starting to worry, and I'm thinking, like, not to say that that's not a worry. I'm sort of thinking, guys, there's farmers that haven't seen rain since last year. And, so let's cool it a little bit on the drought talk, because we just got a whole bunch of rain this week. It's 3 weeks is not a drought, Ontario. It's not a drought.
Yeah. You need to clip that.
Some of that is it's relative to what you're used to and what your season is normally like, but
it's still only 3 weeks, guys.
It is a lot harder to be confident selling crops right now. Going back to the sentiment index findings here, Shaun, when crop prices have declined as much as they have from a year ago or even last fall, when you're selling crop at prices as high as you've ever sold or top five, it's a lot easier to feel good about it, and that's where I think the confidence we're seeing that confidence in marketing crops steadily declining here over the last year. So,
but that's emotion creeping into the marketing decision, is it not?
Oh, Shaun, because that never happens.
Yeah, exactly.
No, like
people answering the survey are human.
Yeah, exactly. We are not robots.
Like, if you look at outlook on selling crops, is it better to hold today versus sell? Yeah, we've essentially cut the index in half since September. We've gone from like a 128 to a 70. Okay. Mm-hmm. I get that. Full stop. But I actually think the declining confidence is more of a concern relative to how people feel about their farm profitability in 2023, right? Because if even if the market's going down, you can still have confidence in how you're approaching that declining market. Right?
I think so, but I think it's also part of what we're measuring here too is we are talking about confidence, right? So your ability to make the right decision. I think it's easy to make good decisions when the market's running up into, new territory. And if your biggest regret is that you could have made more, that's kind of not a bad problem to have. And that's what we went through not that long ago. And now we're into, all right, am I making the right move? What is the floor price I should be setting? How do I use these tools? There's a lot of uncertainty, and we know some farmers who fully embrace all the puts and the calls and the options and all that stuff, and then others that are still kind of mystified by it, and for good reason, because you need to take some time to learn how to do this, or at least work with someone who does, and that creates uncertainty. And that's, I think, what's being reflected in our sentiment index, is that lack of confidence in knowing, is this the right move?
Yeah, and if you look at future farm financial performance, we're down to a 74, which oddly enough is the same as it was in September. Now, a lot has changed since September. Now, if you look at the winter months, we kind of do like a hill. Okay, it's like an Ontario mountain. We'll put it that way. A coulee, we would call it in Alberta. But we're back to 74 out of 200. That's pretty pessimistic, and it's equivalent to how people felt in September. Now, we've seen since September, we've seen the market obviously decline, but we've also seen input prices show some relief too. So there's like a net thing that is definitely happening there. And now, having said all that, I guess a positive out of this is that we ask people about their mental health. We ask them, how does your mental health today compare to 12 months ago? We're pretty neutral. We're at a 94, and we've been pretty flat. So with all the volatility that's happened since September, we really haven't seen the state of mental health deteriorate, even though we've seen, how people feel about their financial performance really decline. So I think that's a positive take out of it, Kelvin.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing about this, the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index is still less than a year old. So I think we're going to, as we do this for more years, we're going to see some cyclical stuff happening here in an annual kind of in the cropping season pattern or in the calving season. Every type of agriculture has its seasons. And so I'm curious whether we're going to see this kind of the mental health or even the farm financial performance metrics, whether there's kind of a cyclical nature as to how farmers view their farm and view how they're doing and all that type of thing. Of course, we know spring and fall are stressful times a year compared to winter in many cases. And so that's where I do think as we continue running these surveys, running the RealAg Studies Insights Panel, I think it's going to be interesting to see how these cycles play out.
Yeah, and if you think marketing your crop is confusing and you don't really know what you should be doing, and I don't blame you, trying to be like a bond trader right now. This week, kind of bizarre. We got central banks going in multiple directions. So this is from the Wall Street Journal. In just 24 hours this past week, the central banks of the world's three biggest economic blocs came to starkly different conclusions. With the Eurozone raising rates, the U.S. on hold, and China cutting. It's getting harder for investors to understand the global economy and potentially getting harder for the Federal Reserve to put a lid on inflation. All of that relates back to demand for agricultural commodities. This is a confusing time. There's a lot of conflicting data, and central banks are having to deal with it. Never mind farmers trying to market their crops properly. It's very confusing. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure I'd put it as bluntly as what the quote you just read from the Wall Street Journal would say, because the U.S. is still talking about raising rates again. This is just a pause, and the pause was not a surprise, but everybody was already looking past this week's decision. Is the analysis that I read, at least, it seemed everybody was already looking to July and the decisions later this summer. They were assuming a pause this week and then assuming increases down the road. Part of that was actually indicated or predicated by the Bank of Canada decision last week to raise, as the Bank of Canada decision, from what I understand, was actually relevant outside of Canada in some ways, is it kind of set the tone and had more of an impact than Bank of Canada decisions often do, because they chose to raise, and that kind of raised red flags. And okay, hang on, we are going higher. And Canada, US, Australia, the EU, I think all those markets are kind of on the same page still. China, of course, has other things going on as well. So that's where they're cutting. You get into China and Turkey and some of these countries where governments have different points of view on how to manage inflation.
I think there was hope that the Fed was going to pause, because there's this big concern that the Fed's going to go too far and then have regrets, right? So I think I would describe it as there was just a lot of people hoping they would pause and then reflect on the data, because there is a lot of you can take a data point and hammer home what you think they should do. It's when you put 6 data points together where it's a bit of a puzzle that doesn't necessarily fit together. It's like you've put 6 different jigsaw puzzles, and because there are 1,000 pieces, you think they're all the same, how it all fits together, and that's not exactly how it works. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to do updates on Viterra and Bunge. We've also got a fight over interswitching. We're also going to talk about Canada being quite unproductive. What the heck are we doing, and how do we fix it? You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Did you know that Pioneer now has a full lineup of Enlist E3 soybeans? Take a look at Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans for the highest yield potential and for the best agronomic package and herbicide trade options. From the lab to the field, Pioneer brand Enlist E3 soybeans are the best in beans, period. Ask your local Pioneer representative about Enlist E3 beans.
As you head out into the field this season, the Corn School's got you covered. Everything from tillage discussions, weed control info, field trial results, yield strategies, and more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on Sirius XM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Here for the RealAg Issues Panel, Shaun Haney, Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith, all of Real Agriculture, breaking down the big issues of the week. Well, our friend David Collato at Abacus Data has put out some new survey results on asking Canadians. Now, these aren't farmers and ranchers, like we were just talking about the Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index. These are Canadians. What are the top 3 issues facing Canadians today? No surprise, I think the rising cost of living, top of the list. 79% of Canadians said that's in my top 3. What's interesting to me is how low the Russian invasion of Ukraine is. 7%. I guess it feels kind of far away. That might be that's kind of we could do a whole segment on the fact that only 7% of Canadians feel that's a big deal. But climate change and the environment at 28%, the economy 38%, housing affordability and accessibility 43%. If you're in a city, of course, that's a big deal, like more so than probably in rural areas. And I was glad to see healthcare at 54%. It was number 2 on the list because at some point Canadians have to have the aptitude or the appetite, I guess, to want to try to fix our healthcare situation. Lyndsey, what stood out to you when you look at this table in terms of what issues are important to Canadians?
So it's interesting here because it also, if anyone wants to go check it out, it also shows, so I think this is a month-over-month survey, so it does show sort of how they've moved. And that, I think, is really interesting because I think we can perhaps see what's happening in the news or in the daily life and how that might shift some of those numbers. So we did see, I think it's on the climate change and the environment, that went up by 7, which, what was happening during that time. We've got major wildfires, huge smoke issues moving into our major cities. That brings sort of the issue of weather and climate and air pollution, all those things front and center. So that, of course, is interesting to see sort of that change. That line, though, so the priority of climate change in the environment at 28%, that's 11% higher than crime and public safety. And I think for most of us, we would probably sort of scratch our heads a little bit on, some of the very serious and endemic issues we have in our cities and our towns and our rural areas with crime and public safety. But it makes me sort of think about, okay, so why that difference? And partially I would think it has to do with what's going on, in the everyday. And we think about, so whether it's the wildfires or if it's during hurricane season and we get some very devastating hurricanes. I mean, we had wildfires from Halifax all the way to BC. So this is, very front and center at this point. But I think, and I know that surveys, and we do them too with Real Agri studies, are, once you've got a certain amount, it's representative of the public. But I also think about, are the people who are really in the trenches of dealing with poverty and homelessness and these sorts of things answering these surveys? Do you think they have the time or the accessibility or these sorts of things to prioritize that? I sort of doubt it. And so I think there's a certain component of, yes, we're going to say what we think is our top priority, but it's going to be probably what impacts us. And so while there's things that impact me, that's going to bump up the list. Things like not being able to see across my field when it's smoke covered. I mean, Toronto was absolutely socked in. That's going to change people's opinions a lot, I think.
Yeah. Now, I think the rising cost of living, though, at 79%, shows a pretty broad cross section of people being, this isn't just upper class, the one percenters that are answering this kind of survey, because those one percenters that concerned about the rising cost of living. Maybe you got to trade in one of your 5 Mercedes.
Probably not. No, and so it's no surprise to me that one is by far the first, because of course that impacts everyone from the most vulnerable all the way up to people who maybe don't worry so much about, paycheck to paycheck. It impacts, I mean, the rising interest rates, overall inflation, all of those impacts absolutely everybody through from people starting out to those retiring to whatever. So that's
Lyndsey,
not a surprise.
We're going to get some insight here from Kelvin. Okay, just Kelvin, you need to help Lyndsey and I here. Healthcare at 54%, number 2 on the list. What do we take from that rating? Does it mean that Canadians want to fix it? They want to keep what they have? How do we view this? This is such a sacred cow that if you think no political party wants to really, really tackle supply management, let me introduce you to healthcare. Kelvin, what do you take from this number?
I don't know if I have any great insight. And before I do comment on your question, I'm going to first acknowledge that I think Lyndsey just talked about inflation, introduced the topic of inflation.
No,
yes, on the show today.
She did.
Lyndsey gets a gold star for that. But yes, regarding healthcare, I do think that all Canadians and all parties can agree on one thing, and that is our healthcare system is struggling and it needs improving, and it's not meeting the expectations of Canadians in general, not meeting the kind of the social promise of what our healthcare in Canada is supposed to be. And so I think that's why it's second on the list and so high at 54% of Canadians rating it as a top 3 issue.
Yeah, but
that doesn't give us any solutions because we disagree on the solutions to it.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Well,
when you have I read this article, okay, British Columbia, the lineups are so long. They're now having to outsource and ship people to Washington State, and the province pays for access to the clinic in Washington State. Kelvin, I think you and I talked about this privately at one point. Manitoba and North Dakota have agreements in place. You can't and believe me, the U.S. system not perfect. I've had to participate in it for a kid's surgery. It is not perfect at all, but neither is our system.
No.
But we're willing to diss the U.S. system at length all the time, but then let it be the backstop for us because our own bureaucracy can't get it its own way. Lyndsey, sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. I mean, because that's a key point is that we often, and the royal we here, but remember, our provinces are what the provinces run the healthcare systems in their own jurisdiction, right? So healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. Obviously, there's money from the feds and there's more coming, but this is the provinces run them. And even by nature of doing that, we have issues, of course, because we're supposed to have, everyone's supposed to have access to essentially equivalent care. But depending on the province you live in, it can be very different, and it's not supposed to be that way. But then we also know that it is more expensive to do these Band-Aid things like hiring private nurses to fill in gaps and all those. So in the short term, you're paying a premium for things because you have long-term issues. And I'm not sure where, at a provincial level, we as provincial citizens have let this slide and let the governments of the day and the day before and the day before, because apparently that's what you get to do. You get to blame everybody before. How we've been just sitting there saying, yeah, no, this is cool. It's fine. It's not fine.
Yeah.
This is a system that needs an overhaul from top to bottom. I don't even know where you start, but we need training or accreditation of staff, from surgeons all the way GPs, nurses, whatever. We need better funding. There's facilities that need upgrading, whatever. And it's probably going to hurt as far as financially.
Oh, now you're doing crazy talk. We don't.
I know. We have to pay for it.
Cheapers.
But we are hurting, and we are paying for it. So this is the part that you're right. We joke sometimes about how an American ticks us off, and it's like, okay, I can go get my feelings checked for free, right? It's not free. We all pay for it in our taxes, and it's not working. And we are waiting. People are waiting way too long for surgeries. People are waiting way too long. Right now, like we've had in Ontario, we've had emergency rooms shutting down on weekends, overnights, whatever. That's an emergency room is supposed to be open all the time because they don't have staff.
And that's across the country. And the frontline staff, this is no reflection on the frontline staff. They are putting in an immense effort and more than what they should have to. For example, our family is my mom sent the family group chat this week a message asking whether we could get together for Father's Day on Sunday. My sister, who's a nurse, already earlier in the week could predict that she's going to be mandated to work. So that means it's beyond what she's supposed to be doing. She's going to be mandated to work because there isn't somebody to work on Sunday. And she knew that 5 days ahead of time. Yeah. This is not an uncommon story across the country. So the frontline, we need to find more nurses. We need to find more frontline staff. That's part of the immigration discussion probably as well. But there's still, there's so many different areas that, and more money won't fix it, but it will cost more.
Well, and we have these dirty little secrets too. We're totally fine with the interprovincial loopholes, where if you go to a different province to get surgery done, you can pay for it. There's things like that. Kelvin, I was talking to a friend of mine on the weekend. He has permanent nerve damage and his back is basically screwed for the rest of his life, preventing him from doing any sort of physical activity for the most part because he had to wait a year and a half for a surgery.
And that's,
but if you can afford it, you go to the U.S. or you go to Germany or Mexico for surgery. Yeah. So there, right away, we don't have universal health care anymore.
It's not. Exactly. And so, I mean, I don't think we need a system that eliminates, the fact that there are going to be other options elsewhere if you can afford it. That's not realistic. But the average Canadian struggles to find a basic GP, and a general practitioner is your gateway into even accessing all the rest of it. So we're failing at the very basic level, let alone, and exactly to your point, Shaun, a lot of issues only get worse the longer you wait. And so the fact that, if we've got 18-month backlogs and those sorts of things, we're going to end up paying more in the long run, both on the human toll and financially, the longer this goes on.
Yeah. Okay, we got to take a break. We've got more coming up here on the RealAg Issues Panel. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio, 147, Sirius XM.
Co-op Ag Zone Field is a digital agronomy tool designed to help optimize your operation. Through integrated layers of satellite imagery, soil maps, yield data, and more, Co-op Grow Team members use Ag Zone Field to provide organized, timely, in-season data, allowing you to make informed management decisions quickly and effectively. Trust your co-op grow team to support your operation with AgZone Field. Contact your local co-op today.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner, all of RealAgriculture here for the RealAg Issues Panel. Well, the Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association invites you to attend partnerships. Lyndsey, this seems like something you would go to.
I totally would, actually.
You should go to this.
I would.
The farmer and the cattleman. You're going to hear about you're going to hear from guest speakers like Rick Clark and Terry Aberhart, as well as a panel of farmers who are alleviating fertilizer costs by including cattle and cover crops into their grain farm rotations. To find out more about this happening at Canada's Farm Show, June 21st and 22nd in Regina, you can, and actually tickets are free. You just got to pre-register, or you can call 306-421-8538. That is 306-421-8538.
How is next week the Regina Farm Show already?
Yeah, can we talk about that for a second? That's next week.
It's a fabulous question.
Like, oh my goodness. Like, it
I know.
doesn't... June is disappearing.
And I know it's like kind of like a conversation crutch, like, oh boy, year's flying by. I'm telling you, lightning. Lightning. It is just, yesterday I was deep into my October, November calendar. Talk about depressing. My mom.
I'm just going 2 weeks ahead. That's it. That's all I can handle right now.
I was sitting on the deck and having a glass of wine and playing some cards with my mom the other night. And she says, well, days are about to get shorter. I know. And you
Did you just...
Right.
You threw the deck of cards and you're like, I'm out.
I'm done.
That's what I would do. I'd be flipping the table. You bite your tongue.
She asked a really good question. Why do our kids go to school until the end of June to when the days start getting shorter? What are we doing?
So in the US they end in end of May.
Yes.
And but then they start earlier, of course. And I actually, to really throw a wrench in things, the New Zealand system is completely different, and they actually go year round. But they have longer. They have a 1 month break, and then they have 2 week breaks throughout the year. Yeah. But they don't have summers off. They spread it out over the year, and I highly recommend this.
You like that, eh? Okay.
Yeah, I do. Yep. Because honestly, our school year is actually loosely based around the cropping year, right? Which most people aren't farming anymore. I hate to break it to everybody.
How we got there?
That's how we got there. It was so that the kids would be off for the farming season.
Really?
Yes, really.
Well, what about harvest, though?
Well,
do you need those kids for harvest? The child labor is no longer
They probably started in November, let's be honest. Also, kids didn't go past grade 9, Shaun, so it's not like we should be replicating these things. Well, anyway.
The fact our system is still built on something when most people didn't get past grade 9 seems like there's a little bit of a problem there. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's jump into discussion about some other things that are happening in Canadian ag. During the commercial break, Lyndsey said we better talk about something that has to do with farming. Viterra and Bunge. This is a deal that obviously the Competition Bureau of Canada is going to have something to say about. The feedback, if I look at my inbox, and I think we did a poll a couple weeks ago too, let's mush those two things together. Farmers not feeling very positive about this potential deal, Kelvin. I think I'm understating that.
There is a lot of concern about reduced competition, the potential of reduced competition from this. And yeah, I don't think you're understating it, because that is the major concern. There are mixed signals, though, when we talk to other parts of the industry. Several grain industry veterans that we talked to this week said they see Bunge and Viterra's assets overall complementing each other. There are of course, local situations where the Competition Bureau and regulators will have to step in different countries. But yeah, from a farmer perspective, certainly here in Manitoba, I've talked about it before. We have a canola crush plant owned by Viterra and one less than 75 kilometers away owned by Bunge. And so That to me seems like a reduced competition scenario if the same company owns both of those. So then I think that's the type of thing that a lot of farmers see. We did talk to we've talked to some people that are familiar with the deal and or familiar with the company's thinking on it, and they are certainly downplaying some of the competitive concerns. One of those areas, of course, is Bunge's stake in G3, the company that was formed together with the Saudi Arabian government's agricultural investment company back in 2015 when they bought the Canadian Wheat Board's assets. G3 is, at the time, was majority owned by Bunge, but SALIC, the Saudis, have since acquired majority control. So right now, Bunge is believed to own 25% of G3. And people that are familiar with the company's thinking say that Bunge is only a passive minority investor, does not have operational control over G3, does not participate in G3's negotiations with suppliers and customers, and has no say in its commercial interactions. And so that, I think, is going to be Bunge's message to the Competition Bureau. They're going to try to say that, hang on, we're hands off of G3 and we should be allowed to keep that 25% stake. That's where some farmers are pretty concerned, though, about Bunge owning a stake in a G3 elevator that's located close to a Viterra elevator that would also be owned by Bunge if this deal goes through.
Well, earlier this week, I asked the audience about, like when you look at consolidation, what's worse, horizontal consolidation or vertical consolidation? Okay, so I see this as kind of like a lateral move, like it's horizontal vertical consolidation.
Yep.
We're going to talk about Walmart getting into being a beef packer. That's a little bit more vertical consolidation. Right. Which one is worse? And I got an email here from Ward. Okay, and Ward says both instances negatively impact degree of competition in the marketplace by reducing market participants. Which is worse? I would say it depends. Generally, vertical is seen to be positive as it ends double margin charges for products in a perfectly competitive marketplace. However, recent research has shown anti-competitive effects from vertical where there is less than optimal competition. This then could allow a firm to unduly influence price in two segments of the value chain, compounding negative pressure on the price takers at the bottom. Ward right there showing how smart our audience is. Thoughts on that, Lyndsey?
So if we think of like real world examples, I think one of the ones that we often look to is hogs, right? So the hog industry in Canada in the past 20 years, I guess maybe 30 now if you have to go back that far, but certainly moved very quickly towards vertical integration, and there were definitely some losers in that one. I can't say that the processors or those at the top hurt, but there were any deals, there's going to be winners and losers, but I would say overall the hog industry is one that is very vertically integrated, and there are certainly people that participate in it and I think do very well and are happy with where they're at, but it also has created a whole lot of hurt at different times in different areas. So this sort of more this horizontal lateral sort of integration, I mean, to Ward's point, it still has some of the same impacts as far as competition goes, in that, if they've just got that much more reach, you've got that many fewer competitors. There are some farmers in Western Canada that definitely do have a few options and can make a couple phone calls about pricing or delivery dates or those sorts of things. And then there's others that it's one or you're on the road for several hours. And that adds costs, that's time, that's all of those things. So, to the point of, is the G3 issue going to really be a big one? I don't know. But I definitely think we're going to see some significant divestitures in certain areas where there is that crossover. I guess my question is, does this create an increased likelihood that things like the crush plants that are planned happen, or a decreased likelihood that they happen?
Well, I'll let Kelvin's got some insight there, but I did hear from one very long time grain industry insider that this deal has very little to do about handling of grain. It is all about biofuels. And even made the statement, it has to be about biofuels because grain handling is so low margin. Is the perspective that he provided. So Kelvin, what happens with that Viterra Regina crush plant that is being intended to be built?
It sounds like it's still optimistic that it's going ahead. The company leadership the leadership that will be leading the combined company, the Bunge, after it's merged, has yet to be briefed on it fully. There's a full comprehensive briefing that's expected around the Regina project, but it sounds like they still see it as an attractive investment. Of course, at the time it was announced, it was billed as the world's largest canola crush facility of its type. 2.5 million tons per year, I believe, is the capacity that it's projected to have. So that, like you said, Shaun, though, oilseed crush margins are, especially over the last number of years, have been substantially higher than grain handling. And so I think a lot of the focus of this deal, whether we look at Viterra's crush assets in Asia, what they own in Argentina, here in Canada when it comes to canola, in the US as well, a lot of this deal has to do with crushing, turning oil seeds into fuels and meal. And some of that is also connected to renewable fuel policy in different countries as well, where governments are mandating lower carbon fuel, lower emission fuels and those types of things.
Okay, well, I mentioned Walmart and being a packer. So they currently have a $325 million processing facility in Nebraska. Now they're going to be opening a $257 million beef packaging and distribution facility in Kansas. This is a little bit more in the vertical, moving down the chain, having more control of your supply chain. What's our take on big retailers making those kinds of moves? Is that good, or should we be concerned about that too?
This is vertical integration, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Of it. To me, vertical is still not as bad as horizontal, because if you have horizontal integration, going back to your question earlier, Shaun, if you have horizontal, then somebody can essentially have a monopoly or a bottleneck and control that bottleneck in that industry or in that supply chain. Where vertical, here you have a chance of distributing those, or if one stage isn't profitable, you can make up those margins at a different stage and keep all the stages intact, and instead of having that specific stage go under or out of business, that type of thing, or have to sell out and consolidate. To me, Walmart investing in this isn't a bad thing. It's another buyer for beef, another player at the processing and earlier in the supply chain kind of stage. So I'm not, to me, of course, there will be lots of specific issues around each specific scenario, but from a big picture, this seems like not a bad thing for ranchers.
Now, I think I understand why farmers are concerned about the consolidation. I get it. More competition is better. I would say, though, the companies, the entities that are the most impacted by this kind of transaction, make up an example. The company that does all the trucking for Viterra, okay? Their business is all built around having this customer Viterra. When a deal like this goes through, Bunge says, you know what, we're going to use, we have our own supply chain partners. We're going to ask our current trucking provider to double their size and provide the services. Mm-hmm. Trucking company that was working for Viterra no longer has a business. And so I think when we look at stakeholders impacted, it's the service providers that are really the ones probably sweating bullets.
But if you only have one client or one customer, you're in a precarious position to start with.
Mm-hmm. It happens, though. Like,
it happens. There's tons of businesses. Like a high percentage of businesses are built that way. You're right.
Absolutely.
Sometimes countries are too.
Well, it's called Canada to the U.S. sometimes. Yes, exactly.
Pointing it out, guys.
Okay, we got to take a break. We'll be back with more here on the RealAg Issues Panel here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Shaun Haney, Lyndsey Smith, and Kelvin Heppner. And we're talking about the biggest issues of the week. We've been terribly sidetracked today. I apologize to everybody. It's been a lot of fun. I wish we had a couple more hours to do here. Bill C-234, Kelvin, had a hard time getting through the Senate. I guess we've made some progress this week, but we're up against a deadline that this one may be punted till the fall.
Yeah, it is going to be punted to fall because it was delayed at second reading by the senator who is the critic for the bill. He chose to wait basically a week longer than what was expected by groups that were pushing to have C-234 pushed through before the summer break. This is, of course, the bill that removes the carbon tax, the federal carbon levy from propane and natural gas used for grain drying, barn heating, and other on-farm uses. And now, it's been referred to the committee stage, which is a step forward for this bill, but it did not get over the finish line before the summer break, or it's not going to, because the senator and the group of progressive senators in the Senate were also successful in having it referred to not only the Agriculture Committee for review, but it's also going to go to the Senate's Finance Committee for review. And so that committee has a much longer backlog of stuff to get through. Those meetings are expected to take place in fall. The Finance Committee will then have recommendations for the Ag Committee, and then the Ag Committee, which is chaired by Rob Black, is expected to review it and then move it ahead. But this, of course, puts some uncertainty around it because of the possibility. There's a lot of talk in Ottawa, in the bubble right now, about the possibility of prorogation, a throne speech, maybe even an election call. And if that happens, this would be the second time that this bill has made it into the final stages of the Senate approval process and not cross the finish line. So everybody's that's advocating for it is hoping that that's not the case this fall.
What the heck, Quebec? What are you doing?
Okay, but it's not just Quebec.
Quebec doesn't even have the federal carbon tax.
Yeah.
So
this
is one of the issues with the Senate. Yeah. We can have a big discussion here about the Senate if we want to go on another rabbit trail today. This shows where the Senate is such a flawed part of the Canadian legislative system.
No, it's sober second thought, Kelvin. This is just them being sober in their second thoughts. Okay,
then
so
don't get in the way.
I agree with the few senators.
They're not supposed to have veto power.
Okay, exactly. They should be. So, but two things. One of them, Kelvin just said an election. Just stop. None of us are emotionally ready for that. A lot of people would disagree. They would love one tomorrow. I am not one of those people, if only because I just cannot fit it into the schedule right now. But the other thing is, this is politicking. This is exactly that, Kelvin. This is the Senate. It's not just this one senator. It's that this senator is essentially, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, but this is a bill that would remove the quote-unquote price on pollution for propane, for natural gas, for drying, grain, whatever. This, on an environmental level, there's people that don't want it passed, and those are the Liberals and the NDP, realistically. And so this is a way to not let this pass. So it's not just about delaying it. This is exactly that, potentially having this die on the order paper and having to start all over again. And this is just an indirect way, yes, of the Senate being able to stop something based on what the House doesn't want to have happen.
I hate when you're right.
I am very correct on this one, I think.
I hate it. But
anyway.
I feel like it.
They don't want it to happen.
Put the old record on the record player, but this is the ridiculousness of all of this.
It's politics.
There are no other options. And so by not, like, you can believe in something and you can believe in climate change to the nth degree, but at some point you also have to recognize the given situation that some of your constituents are in. And when it comes to grain drying, there are no other options. You can't install a solar panel grain dryer. You're basically forcing people to incur the cost. Mm-hmm. And you're saying,
and it's not insignificant. Like it's
don't grow corn.
Yeah.
At the same time that you're putting a clean fuel regulation in place where you're trying to spur the growth of biofuels,
which come from corn.
And
exactly.
And we're supposed to anticipate and adapt to more volatile weather.
What are we doing?
Yes. Because grain drying, and this is the one thing that we've tried to explain, more volatile weather can mean the need for grain drying, because realistically, if we end up with, monsoon seasons in September and these are like, it is a tool that we have access to. So you're right. And I think we've had this conversation before where different policies sort of fly in the face of other policies from the exact same government. So, but I think if we just step back a little, this is one where anyone who wants a price on pollution, so the Liberal Party, the NDP, and believe in that mechanism, they don't want this bill to go forward, and they've pulled out all the stops so that it doesn't.
The advocates for it would say that the NDP are for this one, Lyndsey. The NDP
and the Green Party.
And the Green Party voted in favor. Even some Liberals voted in favor, but the Liberal
3 of them, yes.
PMO, the Liberal headquarters, and this senator from Quebec is I think you could say carrying water for the Liberal Party on this one. There's also horse trading in the Senate as to Conservatives have delayed some other bills in speaking to them at the second reading stage too. So some of this is also petty horse trading and, like you said, politicking in the Senate bills.
I asked Barlow about that. It's if this was retribution for the filibuster budget.
I don't think that one specifically, but there is a bill. It's called the Jane Goodall bill that the Conservatives took many months, I believe, to speak to at second reading, and so there's some back and forth there between the so-called independent senators that aren't
so-called independent
parties.
Maybe independent is code for whoever I agree with. So
Conveniently. Oh God! This makes no sense. Just frustrating. We're supposed to be happy on a Friday, and look how we end this. Okay, I do want to mention 1,300 people at Bell. We got to do this quickly. 1,300 people at Bell laid off this week. People in the back end, but also a lot of writers. The Athletic, which Kelvin and I think agree is one of the best from a sports writing perspective. They had some big cutbacks here in the last 2 weeks. The media business is absolutely in a flux. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it. Some of them are not going to be what's going through your mind. A little bit of inside baseball, so to speak. But I think it's makes sense, though, from our standpoint as Real Agriculture and a media company to say, thank you to all of our advertisers and most of all our audience, because we very much appreciate it. Without you, the three of us don't get a chance to hang out here every Friday and do the work that we do every single day of the week, and love bringing you the information, the insight on the issues. So just wanted to point that out. Thank you so much for being a member of the Real Agriculture audience. We greatly, greatly appreciate it as the media business goes through a very, very difficult time indeed, for sure. Even in sports, where actually some would say that's where actually the money is to be made from a sports media perspective. Those athletic cutbacks, very, very, they're telling for sure. Kelvin, have yourself a great weekend.
Thank you. That's well said, Shaun. Take care, everyone.
Lyndsey, all the best to you.
Yes, to you as well, and happy Father's Day to all the dads out there.
Oh, that's right. It is Father's Day.
It's on Sunday.
That's right. Yeah. We'll be spending it at the baseball field. If you have any feedback on today's show, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Or, of course, you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. And we will chat again on Monday. Cheers, everybody.